It's rolling now, so whenever you want to start.
We are recording the interview of Navy veteran Brenda Boorda. This interview is being conducted by Navy veteran C.J. Janes from the collaborated efforts of the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project and the Raytheon Company. This interview is being recorded at Arlington Towers in Arlington, Virginia. It is 1:50 p.m. on November 4th, 2017. So good afternoon. Brenda, can you tell me a little bit about where you were born and about your early years?
So I'm originally from Lexington, Kentucky, and I have my mom and dad still live there. And my dad was, he actually was in the Navy. He was an enlisted submariner, electrician's mate, and he served for 3 or 4 years. And then I came along and he decided it was time to leave the military and wanted to be home. So he got out and he went to work at IBM, and he worked there for 35 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my growing up years, and she eventually became a draftsman and worked at IBM as well, and then on to some other places in the area. I have a brother and sister. They're younger than me. My brother works in Tampa now. He's worked at many different jobs. He was electronics technician, and then my sister's an interior decorator, and she's been doing that for, I don't know, many years now. So I graduated from college in 1981. So just about the time as there's a large recession going on in the country, it's like I need a job, and the Navy was hiring. Reagan had just taken the reins of the country and was ramping up the military, and there was a big hiring going on, and I entered an ad in the paper. I didn't actually know it was the Navy, but I wanted to go to Florida. It said teachers needed in Florida. It was this little tiny 1-inch thing, call this number. So I called, it's the Navy recruiter. I'm like, oh, the Navy recruiter, okay. And he goes, well, we're hiring teachers, math, physics, chemistry, and I was a chemistry major. So I said, oh, I'll apply. Little did I know it was nuclear power school in Orlando, Florida. So he got me on the interview circuit, which then was fairly significant. You had to come to naval reactors here in Washington, D.C., and take a math test, a physics test, and 3 technical interviews. And then the last interview was with Admiral Rickover himself. He's the head of naval reactors. So I passed all of them and was able to get one of the slots. And it's interesting on the interview process, though, because I'm from Kentucky, so it's a small town, right? Not real, a lot of big businesses, right? So they bring you in and they put you in the conference room and they say, you sit here, the admiral sits here, I sit there, and I'm like, who is this admiral? I mean, I don't even know who this guy is. I mean, I have no idea. I failed to do my research, and they go, you only speak when he speaks to you. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And so he comes in and he says, you have really long hair. I go, yeah, I have long hair. He goes, so you need to cut your hair off. I'm like, okay, I think I could do that. And proceeds to ask me a few other questions. I'm in there for 10 minutes, and they think that I've actually left, and they actually thought I just left the building, that I was upset. That was a very interesting thing. I said, no, I think I got the job. And they're like, oh yeah, you did really well. I said, oh, that's good. So that's how I got into the Navy. And of course, teaching nuclear power school was an interesting experience. It was a very large school then, 4,000 students, a staff of about 300 or 400, only a dozen women on the staff at the time. So they were actually trying to actively recruit more women for those roles. I took the job, obviously, and as my first role. It was supposed to be a dead-end job, and then I managed to make it a 20-year career and going into other things. So that's how I got into the Navy.
Very good. Well, let me ask you a little bit about Rickover then. So what were your first impressions of Rickover? Was that what you were expecting admirals to be like since?
Well, he wasn't a very tall man. He was fairly short, and he wasn't even dressed in a uniform. I think he just had a khaki shirt on that day, maybe some collar devices, but that was about it. He wasn't no ribbons or anything like that. So he's sitting behind the desk, and I'm thinking, why is everybody out in the hallway terrified of this man? Because there was the whole top layer of the Naval Academy graduating class were standing out there shaking like leaves, waiting to get in to talk to them and hoping that they would pass. So it was kind of I was not sure why this man had so much power. Later on, of course, he's 84 by now. This is his very last interview cycle, and then he's going to retire. So it was very, it wasn't what I thought. No, not. I mean, you have this vision of admirals, like in their gold uniforms and things, but not what I had expected. Yeah, so my dad had been an enlisted man, and actually, when I went to Newport to OIS indoctrination school, my mom actually gave me a thing of black thread and white thread to show them my patches on, because they did not realize that officers were colored, wore devices. So it was a difference for me.
So how did your dad feel about you joining the Navy, especially as an officer?
Actually, he was really proud. My dad has been very proud of me the whole time. He has always been very supportive of whatever I wanted to do, no matter how crazy it might seem to him. But no, he was very excited. He did always want me to be an engineer, which I finally got to be at one point. But he was very proud.
Okay, Brenda, so tell me a little bit about OIS and what it was like to go through basic training.
So in Newport, there were two different schools. There's Officer Candidate School and there's Officer Indoctrination School. Officer Indoctrination School, where I went, was where the professionals who were already trained in the Navy sense were brought in. So it was the doctors, the lawyers, nurses, civil engineers, and then the nuclear power school instructors. So it was a 6-week school. I remember going up there, and actually my luggage got snowed in. So for the first week, I had no luggage because it snowed in Buffalo, and everybody was lending me stuff. So that was my first week, and then eventually we got to uniform. So I had stuff. My stuff showed up eventually, but it was a really kind of rocky start there. The school was, kind of, I would say, the scaled down version of OCS, more like to teach you how to wear your uniform properly, to actually kind of just do the basics, unlike Officer Candidate School, 4 months school. So it was definitely what they call, well, if you were becoming a Mustang to go into an officer, they would call it fork and knife school. It was fork and knife school.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about your first tour in Orlando, Florida. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So nuclear power school, teaching physics. I taught physics. The first thing you did is you got qualified, which meant you took several of the courses. I took like reactor core dynamics, physics, chemistry, different pieces of it. And then you would go through, it was about 4 or 5 months before they would allow you to teach. You're really teaching, it's an accredited level school. So I taught, like I said, physics. And then there was also the piece of, learning more about, the submarine service. And, I took a couple of sub rides out of, the port over in Florida, and got an opportunity to see up front, what a reactor looks like and things like that. So it pretty much sticks with you for quite a while.
Now, when you first took that job, they told you up front that it was going to be a limited time frame?
They did. They tell you it's 4 years and you're out. So for those who wanted to do more, and there were a few, I was one of them that wanted to stay on in the Navy. You have to go look for something. We had one of the fellow female instructors with me. She actually went to SWAS and went to tenders and was a surface, was a tender, an EDO, an engineering duty officer on the ship, on the tenders. I tried looking at that and went on a ship for 4 weeks, a Knox class frigate, and that was a really interesting trip. And I decided I didn't want to go down the SWAS path. The ship wasn't quite ready. It was an all-male ship, and I was going to be the only female on it, and therefore they were going to treat me very differently, and I decided it was not what I wanted. So I did eventually get orders to the Naval Postgraduate School, and got my degree in computer science, and so went down the comms field after that. Did communications for the next rest of my career, pretty much. So that's how I figured out my path beyond the 4 years at nuclear power school.
So while you were in the Navy, well, when you first came in, it was the combat exclusion law was in, right? So women couldn't go on combatants. Um, did you ever feel like you wanted to go on a combatant and couldn't, or did you feel like you had the right career path for you and you were on a good place?
Well, even was when I had gone down the comms path, it was still like, okay, so now they're saying you have to pick a warfare field, right? Aviation, submarines, or surface, right? I mean, that's really the first edict that kind of came down when combat exclusion. We had to go find a new. They were going to kind of eradicate comms, is what they said, and so I was like, okay, so what am I going to do? My husband's like, my husband was a surface officer. He's like, well, I guess you have to pick something. And I go, okay. So actually, I did apply for the astronaut program, and I did get selected as the mission specialist side on the Navy.
Wow.
And they sent my stuff to NASA, and I didn't get selected by NASA because they picked like one out of like, every few thousand. But even to get even on the Navy list back then in the early '90s was quite a accomplishment. So I felt good, and then slowly but surely we decided that comms could stay a career field over time. I mean, the Navy definitely had different ideas about what to do with women, as time went on. So I got to stay in comms and I didn't have to pick one, but I was sad I didn't get picked up on the astronaut. Though I did find out years later, I do know some astronauts personally now, and I'm a little short for their suits. I found out that these suits are made for someone 5'6" and above, and I'm only 5'2". So I'm sure there's one reason why I might not have got selected. So I'm hoping that might be the only reason, but you never know. But yeah, that was, so I was glad I could stay in comms.
So you mentioned your husband's also military at the time. What was that like being a dual military family?
So being dual military is interesting. Him being surface and me being on the comm side, or information professional for those who are more newer to the service. So it's like, all right, how do we match things up, right? Where can we go? So we did 2 tours in Hawaii, operational tours, and that worked out pretty well. And we really would have liked to gone internationally, but we have 6 children, and there are limitations on how many children you could take overseas. It was, basically any more than 2 or 3, and they were like, you can't really go. So Hawaii was about the most we could actually deploy internationally with our family. So we would normally get, one of us would go early and one would follow. Typically I was the one following, and he was usually early. And we did that over several tours. He would be Ed would be deployed on the ships, and I would do comms. It's nice on the comms side because you can always find ships. I could find him anywhere he was at, so that was always good. I enjoyed, knowing exactly where I could always see him. So that was a cool thing. And a lot of times, working with the family support groups, they would say, well, how are things going? And I could say, these are good. I could have a little insight into it, and that was nice to know. It was kind of comforting to know that somebody actually kind of knew where they were at. So
how did the children enjoy having mom and dad both serving in the Navy?
So of the 6 children, 3 of them went into the service. One became a Marine Corps officer, 2 Army officers. For some reason, none of them wanted to go in the Navy. I think it's a thing about being on a ship. They wanted to be on terra firma. They told me, hard ground under their feet was what they really wanted to see. And they enjoyed their time in the military. A couple have left and gone to work in actually Raytheon, so that's appreciated. And then one's still in the Army. He's a major now. So again, and they did their deployments. Philip was in Ramadi, early in Iraq. Aaron's been on the DMZ. He's been in Afghanistan. Andrew has been in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he's getting ready to deploy again next year. So, they've done their deployments, and they've come back. And so they get the veteran story, too. They understand it. So it's a good thing. I think the family is close. For the Boorda family, we pretty much had someone on active duty, or we have had someone on active duty for the last 65 years. So it's kind of a continuous pattern. And one of the services.
Yeah.
So predominantly Navy, but yes.
So over your career, I'm sure you've had some pretty unusual experiences. Can you maybe talk about one experience that just sticks out as being unusual?
Oh, lots of unusual experiences. So like a lot of women in the service, I'm usually the only woman in the room, or there were sometimes when we had got there was when the combat exclusion law lifted, we did get more women all of a sudden into comms, which was really interesting. They had made a push the last year to push them more toward comms, and there were some that came in, and we spent a lot more time trying to get them acclimated into the environment. I did have a female captain one year, and this is kind of my funsy story. My adventure, my fun days were always April 1st. I loved April Fool's Day because anything could go that day, right? You'd get away with something. So she had this when we were in Hawaii and cars were terrible. Like the fleet of cars was horrible, right? And so there was no good cars. Every car that came up was like, flat tire, like blew up. It was really bad. They hadn't bought any cars in like a decade, and they had to buy more cars because they had turned really bad. So the last one had just really died, and I thought, all right, I'm gonna give her something totally different today. So we had a base of several hundred miles that we had to go through, and we'd run through all the trucks too. We were eating tires up. It was not a good sustained solution. So we bought some ATVs. So I had one done up with the captain's license plate and got her a helmet with an eagle on it, and put it in her parking spot and said, "This is your new vehicle. I'm out of vehicles." And so that was pretty funny. She was like, she got on there, rode around the base a few times, and that was the end of that vehicle too. So it didn't last long. So you had to have some fun things that happened. But and the other thing was, one day I wrote up the fake comms report with all systems down. That was April Fool's Day. So there were some days you could have some fun things happen. So, but for the most part, in comms you try to be pretty serious, because it's kind of comms is life or death. I mean, you cut off your comms to a ship, it's a problem. So we tried to make sure that we didn't have too much fun. But yes.
How about a most memorable experience?
I think the most memorable experience, and I probably will go talk about something that wasn't even on my list to talk about, but I will talk about it, is when my father-in-law became the chief of naval operations. So I think that probably was the most memorable experience. And we came from Hawaii for his swearing in. So I think that happens once in a lifetime, and you don't get that opportunity very often. So I think being there and being part of him being sworn in, and as the head of the U.S. Navy, is a very proud moment, and I think that was a very memorable experience.
What rank were you at that time?
I was a lieutenant commander.
Lieutenant commander.
I have to think, yes, and Ed was a commander.
Yeah. And
so yeah, that was quite a while ago.
Yes. So you served for how many years?
20.
20. So what made you decide to retire?
So over the 20 years, I mean, I obviously had thought about wanting to go to sea earlier, and it really wasn't something that was really possible. Even if I went to SWAS, it was a tender, and I wouldn't have liked it. Got toward the end of my career, and they said, "Well, you can go on a carrier now. We can put you on as a combat systems officer. The time has come." And I said, my time's come. I mean, I've done my 20 years. There's folks behind me. I wanted to do something else. I mean, I have a technical background. I'm not sure the Navy really appreciate technical backgrounds all the time. In certain areas, EDOs maybe, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure that there were that many slots. Again, those are seagoing slots too. So I decided I would give something else a different shot, and retired, and came to work at Raytheon. That's where I work now still, and for 15 years I've been there, and I've enjoyed that. It's funny though, because my husband was deployed when I was getting ready to retire. He actually was chief of staff at Commander Naval Forces Korea, so he was in Korea. So he came back from retirement, went back, and so I'm looking for a job, and he so I get a job. I get the job at Raytheon. He goes, so he comes back. He's back and forth. I mean, for about 4 years, I saw him like 2 weeks a year, and so he's back. He goes, so have you got a real job yet? And I said, well, I think I have a real job. Because most people would get, whatever job they could get. And I said, no, I've really got a real job. And, like 15 years later, it's still a real job. And it's very interesting, the, differences that people see in the first job when you leave the military. They think that you get in, and some people do. They really do you have to have a job to get a job. It's kind of the way it works. But Raytheon's been a good place to me. I've been able to do... I've worked in 3 of the business areas, and I've done IT and program management, engineering, and mission assurance. So, I mean, it's really been a good place for me.
What made you decide to choose Raytheon?
So interesting enough, my neighbors worked at Raytheon, and when you don't actually know how to write a resume after 20 years, and you have to learn to write one, then it's good to give it to someone that's actually reads resumes and hires people. So that's what I did. I gave them my resume, and these were both ex-Navy captains, and they gave them back to be marked up in red ink, and said, "Fix them, and we'll take them in." So they did take them in, and then I got an interview. Raytheon had just cleared a protest on Zumwalt, and they were looking to hire all Navy people they could find in Rhode Island. Just about. They had to probably need 500 people. So I got a job in IT in Raytheon.
So do you think Raytheon is pretty accepting of veterans? How do you think that whole process goes?
It's interesting because I think that the company needs veterans. I think that they struggle with how to integrate them in. I know there's some newer mentoring programs to try to help more senior veterans coming in, feel more connected to the company. I do spend a lot of time with veterans trying to just translate from, what it was you did in the military to what it looks like in corporate America. I mean, like I said, my 2 sons came to work here, and I spent time with them. Like, so what is it you want to do? Do you want to do engineering? Do you want to do supply chain? So you have to have those discussions with folks to kind of feel where their passion is. Because if they aren't passionate about it, they won't stay. But I think we could do a better job of hiring veterans and then integrating them. I do think we could.
So when you think back on your transition process from the Navy to Raytheon, is there anything that you would do different if you had to do it again?
Well, I thought I did fairly well. I think I was more prepared for it. I had thought about retiring for probably longer than most people do. And I think that... and where I went in was comfortable because I went into a Navy group, so it was more comfortable. And that's kind of a separate pocket of a business. Not every place has Navy, so it was more comfortable. I now had to work a lot closer with the Army and the Air Force, and so I've had to learn a lot about the Army and the Air Force, and my sons too have taught me. So, but yeah, I think mine was a little easier because I had thought more about being retired than I think some people do. It wasn't, I chose it as opposed to be a surprise. So.
Yeah. So did your decision to retire at 20 influence your husband at all, or did he stay for 30, or how did that work out?
No, well, I convinced him he should stay to 30 because we saw kids in college. I said we have all the kids to pay bills for, and but then he did retire at 30, and he really retired. He doesn't do anything now. He's stay-at-home dad with the dogs.
Is there anything about your military service or your experiences that you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask about?
So I think that it's interesting going back and joining the Navy in '81. It seems like forever ago, and so many changes over the years. I think it's good to see the progress that's been made and in the different roles that women can now do. And it was a shame that I didn't have that opportunity. I think it's good progress. It continues to expand, which is good. I mean, when I taught at nuclear power school, there were the last couple women going through to be trainers at the prototype, and then they cut them off. And then you look all those years later, and now even on submarines, women are going to serve on submarines. So those are all very positive things. I mean, it might have been different if I'd had different choices, but you can't go back in time.
So let's say you could go back in time. If you were to join the Navy today, what do you think you would do?
Oh, I'd probably pick submarines.
Would you?
I probably would. It would be an adventure. And I think that, well, I like the technical side. I've always liked the technical side. Even in Raytheon, I spent 10 years in engineering, so I really like that a lot more. I'm probably a little more disciplined too in terms of things. The business side is interesting, but I'm not as much a fan of the numbers. I would rather solve the hard technical problems and grow engineers. That would be my favorite thing to do.
Do you think in your role at Raytheon, do you think people reach out to you because you're a veteran for guidance or for advice?
I do. I get a lot of them that come, and I actually work a lot with the other veterans groups like American Corporate Partners. I've been a RayVet sponsor. This is now going on almost a decade. So I think they reach out for the veterans. I hire a lot of veterans. In my last job, I hired a ton of veterans. When you can speak the lingo, I think it helps. I think it's good to see that the person running your organization understands your background. I think that when I can talk about, this is what the Navy does or the Army does, I think that's really powerful. I do find a lot of women coming to see me too, and they're looking for, what is the next role for me. And that's always a great discussion because a lot of them are holding themselves back, unfortunately. And I've gotten a few to let's look beyond the spreadsheet. I've done this 10 times. Let's, and maybe once is enough and let's move on. So I think I do find both groups coming to me, which I make all the time for.
Yeah, so you find yourself in the as a role model.
I do right now. I do. Hopefully, I'm doing well at it. I hope.
So one last question for you. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
So don't close out opportunities. A lot of times I find that people who are looking around will say, that's a really hard thing to do. Why would I want to do that? But sometimes hard things are very rewarding. Particularly like if, it's a job that no one really wants. I've taken those jobs and they've paid off really, really well. I think that those are things I would tell people to go search out. I would tell you to search out a mentor, and if you can turn the mentor into a sponsor, that's actually very powerful too. A sponsor will help you along in your career. I think that for folks who served in the military, be proud of what you did. I am very proud of what I did. Be proud of your family. Your family is really important. I mean, I always told folks that my family came first. And because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to stick with me regardless. And so my family is very important. My family's a military family, and I love them. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the interview, and it is now 2:25.